Greetings and welcome to this conversation. And thank you for taking time to be with us on this momentous day. Um, Most of you, I'm sure all of you know Sister Joan Chittister, a member of the Erie Benedictines, author of dozens of books, known to NCR readers over decades, and still busy on the Zoom speaking circuit. Welcome, Sister Joan.
Hello, Tom. One more conversation.
I'll begin by stipulating that we're not going to be offering any prognostication these hours before the polls close. We'll all have to continue to agonize together. Instead, the question is one that's being asked by many: where do we go from here? How do we face the future, whatever the outcome? And especially in our context, what does religious belief, spirituality, specifically Christianity, have to offer this moment of deep division and rancor? That's a great deal to consider in a brief setting, but I'll dare to put one more question on the plate. And perhaps, Joan, you can start off considering this. Over the weekend, I read through reams of pre-election analysis, mainstream thinkers and thinkers left, right, and in between. And what struck me was that across the board in this very, very divided time, there seemed to be agreement about one issue, and that is that something has happened to us as a people, something that will extend beyond the election and needs to be examined. These writers weren't deep into the matters of polls and turnout. They were talking about things less tangible like character, trust, morality, faith, stability of institutions, and as David Brooks put it, whether there is any longer a floor of decency in the culture. I have to wonder then if Donald Trump, by being so extreme in so many ways, has opened up the space, a kind of unintended consequence for a national conversation that is unexpectedly introspective. Am I way off, or is there something there, Joan?
Oh, not only are you not way off, this is the foundation for a public conversation for the next 4 years. Really, whatever happens today. The fact of the matter is that the educational position that anybody would take, reading fiction, watching, analyzing their families, looking at the path of their own life, you have to come to one conclusion. And when you realize that we have been dimmed 3 and 4 times a day for 4 years, you can't assume that that is an unintended consequence. Once a group of people breach the standards of human behavior that are part of the soul of living together, once we simply throw our social customs away, once that happens, we begin to break down our standards of decency. What we taught our children are now arguing. You don't eat like that. Don't you dare pick up that plate again at table and lick it. Don't talk to your brother that way. This is your brother. And you two have to get along. And the answer comes back, what are you talking about? All of you adults, you do it. You swear at one another and you call one another names. Do you ever hear that in this house? Well, not in this house, but you can on the news night. When people breach the standards of human behavior, they breach the standards of decency, of thought. Where will you draw the philosophical base or any political system that you want to live with if you've already fractured in 1,000 pieces? Why? For the common good of the culture? What's common good? We know.
But I wonder, Joan, I'm wondering though, I mean, if it's all broken up and if there is this kind of tension, do you think there is a new space that wasn't intended for people to talk about things that we wouldn't have noticed, or we wouldn't have been aware of, or we wouldn't be anxious about if Mr. Trump had not been president.
To call him about taking the Constitution for granted and having passed it on to the students I taught with the certain worry about that ever happening in the United States. That only in countries that didn't have checks and balances. I apologize to them in print, because it is perfectly clear that you can walk into a system. Trump has made it you can walk into an established system for 400 years and make mincemeat of it simply by ignoring it. Then you lose your very language of renegotiation. You lose your language of political thought, and you lose your language of culture. And with those things, your model common thugs, or will you be community thinkers? And your values simply dissipate. And what do I mean? Who cares, right? As long as we understand one another, the international community cares. Because when you touch all of those standards, you tell the world you are not predictable anymore. They can't really be sure that they can trust you as a nation and as a people. They don't know that you will maintain what you say you're responsible for. You have lost your international integrity. As some wrote 100 years ago, unless we work for the common good, there won't be any. And so this is, you can call it an unintended consequence, because if by that you mean nobody said, let's go this way, that when you cease to honor common culture and its standards, then what comes out of that is intentional. You don't want to live at that realm of soul or mind or heart. You're just coming in like the bull in the china shop to make mash out of anything that stands in your way. That you can't say that's unintended, because to do that, you have to assume that the culture that has confirmed those pieces had no purpose or intention or understanding of doing it. We took it for granted. And now we're trying to figure out that out of it.
Well, getting to that, I guess let's push this ahead a little bit, because you wrote a column today that was posted today, in which you, in one part of it is I'd invite people to go to the NCR website and catch the whole piece. In one part, you say our problem is that we have been brought up to be taught to be nice, and we think that's a synonym for being good, but it's not. In fact, that is only one half of the Christian dispensation, one dimension of the Jesus life. The other, you say, is the Jesus who spoke justice as well as mercy, who cleared the money changers out of the temple. Where are we being too nice, and what's your recommendation, regardless of who wins, post-election, for what you're talking here about Christians who have been taught to equate niceness with being good? Where should the switch occur, and how should it happen?
Look, yeah. Well, first of all, where did it come from? We grew up taught to follow Jesus, and we did well. We followed Jesus the healer, the Jesus who bounced babies on his knee and was worried about the poor, and raised people from the dead, and let the cripples walk. That's Jesus the healer. Problem is, when you get to that level of understanding, there's somehow or other, it's on something. When you turn Jesus the healer over, you get Jesus the prophet. You get the one who was very clear about what he thought, those who did not speak justice, and only Pharisees, you brood of vipers and hypocrites. And he says to the scribes, you whited sepulchres, tips over vendors, bench temple itself. This is Jesus the prophet. Jesus saying, enough of this, no to this, no. We know how not to say no. We know how to say clearly, well, you know, it was a shock, but, you know, at least it's direct. At least we know what's being said. No, we're hiding. We're hiding.
But Joan, let me push you here. In our own culture, and let's take it post-election, regardless of how would you say to somebody, how would you explain to somebody how to discern real prophets? I mean, there's an awful lot of activity out there. There are people claiming, you know, God's favor and doing a lot of things in the name of belief. Are there measures for people?
Well, you just put your finger on it. You know, it depends on what you say yes to in life and what you say no to. If you say yes, yes to equal rights for all, when you are enabling, when you are promoting, when you are living the goodness that the good God gave us, and that good God wants for all, not just for white male Americans, not just for Western women, but for all peoples everywhere. When your heart is as wide as the globe and your understanding of justice is genuinely justice and mercy for all, then you know you're on the right path, that somehow or other this village of ours can meld and mix with the world village made by the same God, loved by the same God. And it is that God who upholds that standard of loving creation. When we're outside that, when we're well, you know, what are equal rights? When we don't embrace differences because we make ourselves the norm of creation, when we never say yes to the will of God for everyone, then we aren't prophets. We are nowhere near prophetic spirituality. The prophet Jesus is the person who says no to everything that is not of God, no to the abuse of women, no to the rejection crimes against immigrants and their children, no to the rape of the trees, no to the pollution of the skies, no to the poisoning of the oceans, but yes to life. Yes to whatever promotes the good life for good people and a good world. This is not a major philosophical discussion. Our hearts know that definition, and we know when we trespass it. But we have now accepted that substitutes for that yes and that no, the self. It's a kind of a national narcissism that somehow or other we have been trained now that we have to look to dictatorship as real leadership. We have to look to people who are suffering and blame for our suffering. We're so mixed up spiritually, we can't possibly function well politically. All we can do is get into the arena and pull and tug.
Yes. I think we all hear you and applaud the insights. And I'm not going for cheap optimism here, but I don't know if you saw that. I think it was yesterday. Your friend, Father Richard Rohr, gave over his entire daily reflection to a passage from your recent book, The Time Is Now, A Call to Uncommon Courage. And he referred to you, by the way, at the start as someone, quote, whose wisdom and approach to social justice I take very seriously. I won't read the whole thing, but the first two paragraphs, which I think, because you're using that big we, about how kind of destitute the culture is in so many respects. But you also write in this book, in all my years of traveling around the world, one thing has been present in every region everywhere. One thing has stood out and convinced me of the certain triumph of the great human gamble on equality and justice. Everywhere there are people who, despite finding themselves mired in periods of national disruption or personal marginalization, refuse to give up the thought of a better future or give in to the allurements of a deteriorating present. They never lose hope that the values they learn in the best of times or the courage it takes to reclaim their world from the worst of times are worth the commitment of their lives. These people, the best of ourselves, are legion, and they are everywhere. So, are they, and where? He talks about this very optimistic approach.
Yeah, let me answer the first part of that with one of my favorite Sufi stories. It had a big effect on me, a personal effect on me about, I suppose, 25 years ago now. They go fast. The story tells of an old monastic who ran through the streets of the town night after night crying, power, greed, and corruption. Power, greed, and corruption. And for a while, everybody was so shocked into freshness, they stopped and they listened to her. And then as the time went by and the shouting went on night after night, power, greed, and corruption, power, greed, and corruption. One by one, the people kind of began to filter away until there was only a small child left. And she was still running, crying out loud for help. To her, lady, nobody's listening. And she stopped, she looked at the child, and she said, oh, I understand, I know that's true. And then so the child looked straight at her and said, well, if you know nobody's listening to you, why do you go on shouting? And she said, oh, you don't understand. I don't shout in order to change them. I shout so that they cannot change me. If you are a person of value, if you are a follower of Jesus the prophet, as well as Jesus, you preserve the values of the scriptures and of the sight of that Jesus out loud. You stop this in the corner of the church. When necessary, you call the church. You call whatever says yes to injustice. Whatever says yes to who cares about your neighbors who are barely able to keep the house. They have to choose now between the house and the food. That's distinction. That's the best of us. When we see the broadest of us and our heart is the warmest of us, then you see things are going to change because you're going to change them. You're going to change them even at Thanksgiving dinner. You don't have to fight with the family. You just have to say, I think differently than that.
Make sure that people...
I just want you to know differently than that.
Thanks, Joan. It's tough. I don't mean to override you. This is a difficult medium for conversation, but I wanted to make people aware that we would take some questions if you have them. We don't want to go much beyond a half hour, and we have not much time left. And there are, of course, questions galore. But if you'd like to ask them, do that in the designated place, and we'll see if we can get to them. There's one last question I'd like to ask to make sure we get this in. Because in these times, and you've mentioned You've mentioned God in your own responses to some of these questions. And in times of uncertainty, especially great uncertainty as we experience now with the pandemic and the political situation and the divisions in our culture, people are wont to call on God in various ways. It's God's will, or God is in control, or in the end, God will have his way, or maybe there isn't a God. How do you see, you used God in some of your answers. Clarify what you mean by that.
Okay, I want to make it clear. I'm talking about my own journey. And I think people from my generation and beyond all got this. This was the teaching. What happened that would change the basic teaching that we grew up with? It is what happens when classical spirituality meets modern science. When we begin to know more about the universe than we know about the state, then we realize that we are living in a privileged view of an important of the growth of the universe. We were brought up on what I call a childhood God. And I'm here to tell you, having moved from audience around this globe 5 or 6 times, don't think for a minute that has disappeared. For instance, we have people who see God as a vending machine. I put in 10 Hail Marys for 6 weeks because I wanted that certificate from grad school, and I didn't get in. I didn't get it. What kind of a God is that? I did everything I could. God is not a vending machine. Or there are people who think God is a magician. This is the God that you're praying to when the car is coming to the stoplight and you are saying, oh, God, please make that thing turn green. No, God does not not a magician in life. Those who believe that God is a tease. I know God is testing me. I know that this cancer of the bone is a test of faith, but I'm praying very hard that God will intervene. God does not normally intervene in breaking the laws of nature that God created. There are those who think that God can be manipulated. 7 Our Fathers every night for a year will coax God into doing for me what I want done. Or worse, that is a planner of black boxes. I'm trying to figure out what the will of God is for me. The will of God for all of us is the love of all of us. Ability to use all the good we've been given to do good, be good, and have good for others in life. So who is God? God is the creative and through the divorce, through the war, God with us. I'm a Benedictine. The very first degree of humility that is spiritual foundation of Benedictine monasticism, Benedict theology in the 6th century, upside down. Everybody who saw God as what we reach by going up the ladder. We went to Mass so many times. We married a good Catholic. We had 5 kids. We paid all of our bills. We always make a retreat every year, sister. We go to Oberammergau for the Passion Play every other year. We do everything that looks religious would happen to us because God has created everything we need. It's all there. It all depends on how we use it. So for us to sit around in a time like this and say, God is just doing this to test us. God didn't do this. God didn't do this. Somebody voted this into existence. Some of us voted this into existence. God didn't do this. God is here to strengthen us and enable and hold us up in our depression and our pain and our regret and our grief, and to show us a better way for us to be alive so that others may live better as well. That's the adult God of the 21st century, who Benedict says in that first degree, you can't buy God. You cannot merit God. There's nothing you and I, if we lived on our knees for the next 50 years, it would not merit me God. Merit theology is a pagan theology. We have God. Benedict's very clear about that. Recognize that you have God. Recognize that God is with you. Hold on to that God and those values and that side of life, and you too will bring God where God is recognized. That's our task. That's our role. That is the essence of our spirituality. To love the good God who is holding us up, to love the goodness that God has given us. Remember this. Remember always, God created the world, but God didn't finish it. God left to you and me the obligation to finish this world right, wherever we are, in whatever square foot of land you and I live on. That's the land for us to sanctify. That's the land for us to share. That's the land for us to grow. It's that God that will take us through whatever comes now. But know it consciously.
Okay.
We must
Well,
seek that God.
Seeing us through leads me to, of course, one more question. That really wasn't the last one, and that is there was a recent Global Sisters report, and the headline was "People Are Raw. Sisters reflect on how we live together post-election." I would imagine that rawness, or the sense of tension and anxiety, even penetrates the walls of your little priory and the monastery down the road. Are you, as a community, contemplating this reality and what you do about it?
We will, the Erie Benedictines will do what we've been doing for the last 50 years. We will demonstrate in front of the federal building that the federal laws are unversion of this world. We will continue to feed and to support whatever number of poor we ourselves can possibly manage, and we will continue to speak, and we will continue to speak out. There was a time, when the Erie Benedictines were speaking against nuclear weapons and scandalized a number of people who would have preferred to have us in another town. But those very people have come to see. They heard these old women shouting, "Power, greed, and corruption. Power, greed, and corruption." And they knew that what they were seeing was not the Erie Benedictines anybody else to do anything, but maintaining in their consciousness of God and the will of God for that just God whose mercy lies in the justice we give.
I for one can attest to the incredible ministry of that small band of sisters in Erie. I have witnessed it quite a few times, and I can also say with assurance, I know you will keep screaming and shouting in the town square. So With that, I think we have come to the end of our conversation time, and I really thank anybody out there, the people out there who have joined us, and thank you so much, Joan, for taking the time today. Be well.
This is a great medium for us to meet and discuss lots of times.
Mhm.